told you this would be good, you know. And we're talking and laughing and joking around, and there came a lull in our conversation. And Gary, this sounds so cliche, I'm almost embarrassed to say, but it's true, and that is that it got real quiet. I mean, like dead quiet. And I'm listening, and it's just, 15 minutes earlier, we could hardly hear one another over the tree frogs and the crickets and stuff, the night insects. And I said, hey, Toby, is like he would know, is this normal? And he's like, yeah, man, look, we've been laughing and cutting up. They'll be back. But we'll quiet down and they'll be back. And but I felt unnerved by it.
Now, I got to ask you a question, Terry. How old were you at that time?
22.
Okay.
And Toby was 23.
So you guys were youngsters yet?
Yeah. We were just kids, both recently married at the time. And, the plan was to go down and scope it out and take our wives on the next trip. And that would turn out to be my last camping trip.
I wonder why.
So about this time, I felt this unsettled feeling, and Toby is turned to the left, preoccupied with something. And he asked me, he says, hey, man, were those there before? And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And he says, those stars, those 3 stars on the horizon, were they there before? And I looked, and sure enough, there were 3 stars. Each one was about as bright as the North Star. And they sat in a tight little triangle right above the horizon. They were too far above the horizon to have been, road lights or a, parking lot or something. Besides, we were in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we were in a really remote part of Arkansas. And I said, no, those look odd. I mean, we both knew a little bit about aircraft, and, there were no aircraft lights like that configuration. And the things were stationary. They didn't move. And we're kind of watching them, and then they rotate. And they rotated about 3/4 of a turn, like they were on an axis. They turned. And I remember feeling very excited about that for some reason.
Now, I got to jump in. Now, Terry, how many lights were they? 3 of them?
3 of them in a triangular configuration. Each one was equidistant to the other. They made a perfect triangle if you drew a line between the points.
If they just kind of flip like that, I tell you what, James, who's in the background out there, knows me. I'd be looking for diaper wipes or Depends. I would be scared at that point because that's not normal.
Well, you know what? They were on the horizon, and they were horizon's pretty far away, and we were kind of captivated by them. But there was more that happened, and that is that they started to climb up into the sky, and this is the point where we should have panicked. This is the point where had we had our senses about us, we'd have been in the car and got out of there, and we didn't. And I felt a feeling of calm wash over me, and it was akin to sedation. It was almost like feeling, like the shot they give you before they take you into surgery and anesthetize you, the one they give you to relax you. That's what this was like. And I felt weirdly detached. I felt like an observer rather than a participant in this thing. And we watched while over the span of, half an hour or so, these things climb up into the sky. And it's pretty obvious that it's one single object, not, 3 moving in unison. And the sky, there were 1 trillion stars up that night. The sky was just really a brilliant blue from the starlight. And the interior of this thing was jet black with little points of light. And as it's rising into the sky, it starts to tumble. So we'd see 1 light come over the top with 2 on the side and then flip over, if you get my point.
Uh-huh.
And it's doing this tumbling. And I can't help but have a feeling that it's not moving haphazardly. It's moving with purpose. And I don't know where that came from, but that was my feeling. And Toby must have been the same way because, we should have been talking about it. And, there's hardly a word spoken between us. The only thing I recall Toby saying was, "It's really moving now." And we watched it from our vantage point, and we're still laying down on our inflatable air mattresses. We didn't even bother to stand. It's crazy. And from where we were, we could see this triangular shape shadow creep up on us from across the forest, and that should have been spooky, and it wasn't. It was like I said, our emotions were totally inappropriate for what was going on.
So what you were saying, though, let's see, what my weird thing had happened to me is, I was driving back from North Carolina back to Seattle. We were going into the desert in New Mexico, and all of a sudden I saw this bright light around the car, and then all of a sudden inside of the car, lit up bright. And I thought it was a helicopter. Being in the military, I figured, okay, police helicopter. I was speeding, but, I don't even know what the speed limit was back then. But I pull off the side of the road, and I get out of the car. Now, I did notice a car maybe 1,000 feet behind, and it was stopped. I wasn't smart enough to even go there after whatever happened. But I remember getting out in the car. The light was so bright, it was hurting my eyes. I looked up, and it was intensely bright, and poof, it was gone. But you know what? The whole time, I didn't hear a single sound. It's like somebody, like if you were in a sound booth, like in my studio, and you turn everything off, it's stone quiet. And that's not normal. Yes. And then after the light disappeared, then all of a sudden I started hearing whatever, was out in the desert. I started hearing little noises again. But whatever that was going on at this time, it just shut down everything. And it was weird.
That sends a chill up my spine to hear. I say in the book, when I was 8 years old, I saw a UFO. And when I was 8, I was playing in my backyard, and I had the same auditory experience. I saw, and I talk about it in my book. I was playing with a bow and arrow, and I'm loading an arrow into the bow, and I see this circular shadow move across my feet. And I look straight up, and here's this big, beautiful silver disc, about 75 feet over my head. And that's when I heard this weird auditory change, because I was living in St. Louis City, on the south side, and there were cars and cats and dogs and women screaming and, the usual sounds. And it sounded like I had my hands pressed over my ears. Things were muffled until the thing shut off. And then, boom, everything snapped back to normal.
Well, how did you feel at 8 years old when that happened? And did you tell your mom and dad what happened? And what did they respond like?
I went nuts. I went crazy. I was screaming, "Mom! Mom!" And my mom comes running out. She's sure I've shot a neighbor in the head with an arrow or something. And she comes out. I said, "Mom, did you see it? Did you see it? It was so cool. It was so cool." And, it was cool in the way that, like a new sports car is cool,
Uh-huh.
It was beautiful. And I said, "Mom, did you see it? It was a flying saucer. Did you see it? Did you see it?" And, the 60s were a different time. This was 1968, and, 1963. I was 8 years old. And, she told me, "Stop screaming, stop screaming. Don't say that." And she dragged me into the house and said, "Now, I don't know what you saw, Terry, but you did not see a flying saucer." I'm like, "But Mom, I did." She hands me a pen and paper. "Here, draw me what you saw." I draw a circle and hand it back to her. And she's like, "You can't tell people you saw a flying saucer. They'll think something's wrong with you. They'll think something's wrong with us." So, that's that 60s conformity thing. it did not go well. You know, I had nightmares after the fact for a couple of months, and it did not go over well. And so the second time I saw a flying saucer, when I was 11, I didn't tell anybody.
Well, I wonder why. I'll be honest with you. In my situation, I as soon as we got back to Seattle, we ended up in a divorce, and it wasn't because of the UFO. It's just 2.5 years of a bad marriage. But I'll tell you, my wife was so hysterical at the time, and I was. But you know what? I kind of like put it out of my mind. Okay, I just try to, and then I forgot about it in time. But you know what? This is, I know this is about you tonight, but I just want to say what happened to me is years went by. I never thought about it. Didn't think about it. And then I had to go in to see a surgeon because I was having some, problems with my leg and lower back hurting and all that stuff. So they had me do an MRI. And they do the MRI. I go back to the surgeon. I'm sitting in the waiting room, and the head nurse comes up, and she goes, "Well, Gary, where did you get that piece of metal embedded next to your spine, just below your neck?"
Oh.
And she said, "Was that a war injury, or did you get hurt?" And I go, "No, I shattered my tailbone in the military, but no, nothing up there." I go in and talk to the doctor, and the doctor, is start telling me, and showing me X-rays. He goes, "You got this piece of metal. Do you know where it came from?" And he's looking at my back, and and he doesn't see any puncture marks or anything. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Oh my God!
And I didn't think anything of it, other than I remember being dumb and naive. I was young. I was probably about in my 30s at the time, late 30s. I can't remember exactly, but I said to the doctor, I said, "Can you remove it?" And he goes, "No, because it is built up with arthritis and a whole bunch of stuff." He said, "If I remove it, you'll be in a wheelchair."
Yeah.
Okay. Again,
yeah.
I don't think anything about it for years, Terry. One of my oldest sons gets in trouble. I have to go to drug court with him once a month for a year. Now, I'd never been in a courthouse before that because I never, had to go into a courthouse. I didn't fly much before that, so I didn't have no problems there. So I go into and I set the alarm off. Okay, and I didn't think anything of it the first time. A month later, I set the alarm off again. I think like the third or fourth month, they're taking me into a special room where they put that little latex glove on.
Yep.
Okay, and I'm setting the alarms off, and and then my son's out of drug court. I don't think anything of it for years. I don't know if you know who Timothy Collin is.
I don't.
Okay, he was the number 9 implant removal from the late Dr. Roger Lear.
Roger Lear.
Yeah.
Yes, I know Roger Lear. Yes, I know of Dr. Roger Lear.
Yeah, and you know what? The last time I had him on my show, and he's been on about 5 times, it hit me after the show. I start thinking, that bright light in the early 70s in the desert. Then I start thinking about, I can't fly an airplane because if I do, I set off the alarm system. I think about the court thing. The doctor's saying there's a piece of metal in my upper part of below my neck and next to the spine. I wonder myself sometimes, if I was abducted because, it can be that split second. You see that bright light, but who knows how long it actually was. Now,
yes,
you got to bear with me. We have to go on break because the radio stations, so you can go get a cup of jabba, a cup of tea like I do, or whatever you want. We're going to be back with 3 minutes with Terry Lovelace, and we're going to find out more about his abduction and his implant, and we're going to even find out more about his camping trip. So stay tuned to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark.